She vanished 22 years ago. No trace, no answers. And then, a letter, a convent, a box filled with secrets no one was ever meant to find. What began as grief becomes a revelation. This is not just a story about what was lost. It's about what was taken, what was hidden, and what it means to be found. Please subscribe before watching. Thank you. The envelope was cream-colored, thick as cardstock, and bore no return address, only the elegant black lettering, Our Lady of Quiet Mercy. Clara turned it over twice in her hands before opening it, as if weight alone could give her a reason not to. She was standing at her kitchen counter, half-drained coffee cooling beside her, the morning sun washing through the windows of her apartment with a brightness that felt at odds with everything inside the envelope. The letter was handwritten, not in print or script, but in the even, careful penmanship of someone who rarely rushed a word. Miss Clara Reeves, we write to inform you that Sister Marianne passed peacefully in her sleep on March 3rd. As you are listed in her papers as next of kin, we extend our condolences and invite you to attend a private memorial service at Our Lady of Quiet Mercy Convent. Sister Marianne left a small box of personal effects with instructions that it be given to you directly. Should you wish to retrieve it, we kindly ask that you contact us at your earliest convenience. May peace find you in her absence. Sister Helen, Order of the Quiet Mercy. Clara read it 3 times before setting it down. For a long time, she stood motionless, one hand on the countertop, the other hovering near her chest, as if her body hadn't decided yet whether to grieve, dismiss, or feel anything at all. Her phone buzzed on the counter, a news alert, something about a senator resigning. It felt irrelevant. She hadn't spoken to Sister Marianne in years. In fact, spoken might be generous. Her aunt had left for the convent when Clara was 12, and aside from a handful of postcards, always signed simply SM, she had never made contact. Her mother had always referred to her sister as sensitive. Her father called her weak in the spine, but strong in the mouth. Clara had never decided for herself. The convent was up north, tucked in the woods just outside a town that hadn't changed its name since the railroad stopped running. Clara Googled it out of instinct. No website. Just a grainy photo on a local tourist blog showing a slate-roofed building set against a backdrop of evergreens and fog. She stared at the screen a while longer, then opened her email, typed Our Lady of Quiet Mercy, response, and stopped. Her fingers hovered over the keys. She deleted the draft and picked up the letter again. She left a small box of personal effects. The phrasing stuck with her. It wasn't personal belongings, not her things, just effects. As if even in death, Sister Marianne was more concept than person. That night, Clara poured a glass of wine she didn't really want and stood by her window, watching the city lights blur through spring rain. In the silence, memories she hadn't invited came back. Her aunt's voice low and certain, the way she'd hum when washing dishes, how her hand once steadied Clara's arm during a childhood fever. A rare tenderness, faint but real. The last postcard had come 15 years ago. No message, just a photograph of the sea and 4 words on the back. I am praying still. Clara had thrown it away. The next morning she booked a flight to Oregon. The road to the convent was long and narrow, paved with asphalt faded to silver and lined with moss-covered trees that bent toward the sky like they were praying. Clara had rented a compact car at the airport, small enough to navigate the winding roads, forgettable enough to match her mood. A light drizzle softened everything outside her windshield, the shape of the woods, the outline of distant hills, even the occasional mailbox leaning like a tired shoulder at the end of a gravel path. The GPS told her she was 20 minutes out, but she already felt the stillness pressing in. Oregon had a way of being beautiful without being inviting. She glanced at the passenger seat. The letter from the convent was folded neatly beside her phone, along with a half-filled notebook she always traveled with, but rarely used. She hadn't told anyone where she was going, not even Andrew, the editor she sometimes dated and sometimes ignored. He would have asked too many questions, and she didn't have answers yet. Only fragments. She arrived just before noon. The convent grounds were quiet, more so than she'd expected. No sounds of footsteps or birds, not even the low hum of electricity. Just the whisper of wind through pines and the gentle creak of wood as she stepped out of the car. The building itself was simple. Gray stone, dark shutters, weather-worn trim. A modest statue of the Virgin Mary stood near the entrance, her hands outstretched in a gesture of blessing that somehow made Clara feel exposed. The sign above the door, carved in wood and painted by hand, read, Our Lady of Quiet Mercy. Founded 1882. She hesitated, then knocked. The door opened almost immediately, revealing a tall, older woman in a pale habit. Her face was angular, lined with time, but her eyes were a clear and unexpected blue, sharp, like they'd seen more than anyone had told. "Sister Reeves," the woman said. "Just Clara," she replied automatically. "I'm Sister Helen." She stepped aside. "Please come in. We've been expecting you." The interior was warmer than she'd imagined. Not in temperature, but in atmosphere. The walls were wood-paneled and polished, the floor covered in thin but clean rugs, and a faint scent of beeswax and lavender hung in the air. A hallway stretched ahead, doors spaced evenly like punctuation marks in a long sentence. "This way," Sister Helen said, her voice quiet but certain. They passed a chapel on the left, small, lit with candles, and a room that looked like a library, though Clara only glimpsed a few shelves and an old armchair before they turned a corner. "I'll take you to the guest room first," Sister Helen continued. "You'll have time to rest. We're a quiet order here, but not silent. If you need anything, just ring the bell on the table." Clara nodded, unsure if she was meant to speak. At the end of the hall was a plain wooden door. Sister Helen opened it to reveal a modest room, a twin bed, a narrow dresser, a crucifix above the headboard. A small table near the window held a folded blanket, a glass pitcher of water, and, there, in the center, a box. It was about the size of a shoebox, wrapped in brown paper and tied with twine. Clara stared at it. "She asked that you open it in private," Sister Helen said gently, "and that you not feel rushed." "Did she say anything else?" The older woman paused, her expression unreadable. "Only that you were loved, in her way." Then, with a small nod, she stepped back into the hallway and closed the door. Clara sat on the edge of the bed. The mattress dipped beneath her, and the silence in the room felt different now. Not empty, but watching. She reached for the box. The paper was slightly brittle at the corners, the twine tied in a knot that had been double-looped. Practical. Protective. She hesitated before opening it. A part of her expected something dramatic. A birth certificate, maybe, or a letter titled, "The Truth." But inside was something simpler. A black and white photo. A woman holding a baby, standing on a gravel path. A child's hospital bracelet. A rosary, its crucifix snapped at the base. A folded newspaper clipping. And a sealed envelope, labeled in steady handwriting, "Clara." She reached for the photo first. The woman in it wasn't Sister Marianne, not clearly. Her face was turned toward the child, shadowed beneath the brim of a hat, but the hands, long, delicate, strong, looked familiar. The child was a newborn, wrapped in a knit blanket. The photo had been taken with care, but not staged. It looked like someone documenting a moment no one else was supposed to know about. She set the photo down and picked up the bracelet. It was faded, plastic turned yellow with time. The name printed in smudged black letters read, E. Lawson. A date underneath, March 6th, 1983. Her own birth date. Clara's chest tightened. She opened the newspaper clipping with shaking hands. It was from a local paper, the Mornington Sentinel, dated March 9th, 1983. The headline read, "Infant missing from hospital during storm." Local authorities are searching for a newborn baby girl who disappeared from Mornington General Hospital during Sunday night's windstorm. The child, born prematurely to Emily Lawson, was last seen in her bassinet around 10:30 p.m. Staff discovered her missing during a routine check. Police are treating the incident as a potential abduction. Clara read it twice, then she picked up the envelope with her name on it. Her name, written in the same careful handwriting that had signed postcards for years. She held it between her fingers, feeling the weight of it. Not heavy, but what it carried might be. Clara didn't open the letter that night. She kept it on the nightstand beside the glass of water and the rosary, turning the envelope over occasionally like her fingers might learn something her mind couldn't yet bear. The quiet inside the room had a weight to it. Not heavy, exactly, but dense. The kind of silence that seemed to come from inside the walls, not outside them. She slept only in fragments. Every time she drifted off, her dreams reset to the same image, the woman in the photograph holding the child. Always the same gravel path. Always the same strange stillness. By dawn, she gave up and got dressed. She found coffee in the small kitchen near the library. Sister Helen had left a note. "For our guest." Cream in the second drawer. No one else was awake, or if they were, they moved like ghosts. Outside the kitchen window, fog had settled over the trees like a blanket laid gently over old bones. Later that morning, Sister Helen found her in the library, flipping absently through a history of Oregon religious orders. Clara had always been good at looking purposeful in moments she felt anything but. "We'll have a brief service for Sister Marianne this afternoon," Helen said. "You're welcome to attend, of course. It's just us and you." "Did she have any other family?" Clara asked. "None listed. Just your name." Clara nodded, unsure how that made her feel. She wanted to ask, "Why me? Why now?" But it felt childish, like the kind of question you ask the air, not another person. Instead, she said, "Did she talk about me?" "Not often," Helen admitted. "But when she did, it was with a kind of quiet ache." Clara closed the book. "That sounds about right." Helen tilted her head. "You didn't see her much after she came here?" "No," Clara said, more sharply than she meant to. "I was 12 when she left. She said goodbye through a door." Helen didn't flinch. She had her reasons. I'm sure she did. Doesn't mean they were good ones. Silence stretched between them like a hallway with no end. Then Helen, instead of turning away, stepped closer and said, "Would you like to see her cell?" Clara blinked. "Her what?" "Her room. We call them cells. It's monastic, not prison." There was no judgment in her voice. No pity either. Just the calm offering of a door slightly ajar. Clara stood. "Yes, I'd like that." Sister Marianne's cell was at the end of the second-floor corridor. A small room with white walls, a wooden cross above the bed, and a single window that framed the treetops beyond. The bed was made. A small wooden chair sat tucked under the windowsill next to a writing desk. Everything was clean but clearly not recently touched. Clara moved slowly through the space. There was a small shelf with a few books, a worn Bible, Dark Night of the Soul, and a slim volume of Emily Dickinson's poems. One corner of the cover had been dog-eared down to the cardboard. On the desk, a fountain pen rested beside a leather-bound journal. Clara looked at Helen. "It's blank," the nun said. "She was writing letters instead. One of them is yours. The others she burned." "Why?" She said it was her way of preparing. Clara didn't ask for what. She knew. People like Marianne didn't die without rehearsing. On the wall above the desk was a single framed photo. It was of a coastline, rocky, windswept, unmistakably Oregon. The sky was overcast. There were no people in the picture. Just sea and stone and sky, the way she had apparently wanted it. She used to go there? Clara asked. She loved that view, said it reminded her of the beginning of everything. Helen stood by the door, not rushing her, not intruding. Clara turned in the room one last time, letting her eyes rest on the window, the floor, the walls. It struck her as both incredibly sparse and deeply personal, like someone had emptied themselves into silence and left the shape of it behind. She was always good at disappearing, Clara murmured. She didn't disappear, Helen said quietly. She buried. The service was held in the chapel. It was brief, quiet, and deeply still. Just Clara and the nuns, some seated, some standing along the wall like shadows. Sister Helen read a short passage from Romans. Something about grace being sufficient. Clara didn't catch most of it. Her mind wandered, not out of boredom, but because it needed to. The kind of restlessness that comes when your soul's still trying to file new information into the correct emotional drawer. There was no eulogy. No one shared stories. The silence spoke for her. Afterward, Sister Helen placed a single white lily on the altar. Clara stayed behind when the others left. She sat in the second pew, hands clasped in her lap, not praying, not really thinking, just sitting. She remembered once, years ago, how Sister Marianne had scolded her gently for using a loud voice in church. "You don't always have to fill silence, Clara," she'd said. "Sometimes it's already full." Now, that silence sat beside her like an old acquaintance. That evening, Clara finally opened the letter. She sat on the bed, box beside her, fog thick outside the window. The paper was the same kind the convent used, cream, heavy. The handwriting was unmistakably her aunt's. "Clara, I've written and rewritten this so many times that the words feel like bruises. I imagine you reading this with questions I will never answer well. I'm sorry for that. I chose silence, and silence is a poor guardian of truth. There was a girl once, a child. She came into this world quietly, and I loved her. But love and fear make strange bedfellows. I did something I thought was right. Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. Grace isn't always clean. The photo you found, the child was not mine, but I loved her like she was. I tried to protect her from a storm I thought would drown her. That's all I can say. The rest is buried. Maybe someone will dig it up one day. You were never a burden to carry, Clara, only a silence I didn't know how to name. I pray that whatever you find brings you peace, or at least understanding." In grace, Marianne Clara folded the letter slowly and placed it back in the envelope. She didn't cry, but she didn't sleep that night either. Morning brought a pale, listless light to the convent, the kind that filtered in like it wasn't sure if it should be there at all. Clara sat at the small desk in her guest room, the box open before her. She hadn't touched its contents since the night she arrived. It had taken her 2 full days just to open the letter, and now that she had, the rest of it felt heavier, as though the letter had only unlocked more questions, not offered answers. She took the photo out again. It had been printed on matte paper, slightly yellowed at the edges, the corners curling with age. The woman in it still had her head turned, deliberately maybe, but the child she held was clearly visible. A newborn, small, squinting, wrapped in what looked like a handmade blanket. The date on the bracelet matched Clara's birthday exactly. March 6th, 1983. Coincidence was a thin shield for the mind, and hers was starting to crack beneath it. She flipped the photo over. There was writing on the back, something she hadn't noticed the first time. It was faint, written in pencil. "Foresee, in case the world forgets how you began." Clara stared at it for a long time. There was something unspeakably lonely about that line, as though whoever wrote it knew they wouldn't be there to explain the rest. She turned to the newspaper clipping again. She'd skimmed it before, But this time she read every word. The mother's name, Emily Lawson, was the only concrete detail the article offered. The baby had been born premature during a winter storm. There was no photo, no sketch, just a small column on the bottom corner of page 3. A lost child in the middle of a much larger news cycle. Clara opened her laptop and searched Emily Lawson Mornington missing child, 1983. Nothing came up immediately, just old scanned PDFs and a forum post from a local genealogy group wondering about mystery births from the 80s. She refined her search. Nothing. No obituary, no follow-up story, no charges ever filed. She checked the county archive website, but the hospital from the article had been torn down a decade ago, replaced with a regional medical center. Their records didn't go back far enough. She sat back in her chair. Who was Emily Lawson? Was she Clara's mother? A nurse? Someone Marianne knew? The facts weren't facts yet. They were threads, and Clara didn't know how to tie them together. She reached into the box again. The rosary was old, delicate, hand-knotted, the beads worn smooth by years of use. The crucifix was snapped clean at the neck, and only the crossbeam remained. It looked like someone had tried to repair it once, a tiny dot of glue near the break, but failed. Clara held it for a moment, unsure what she expected to feel. Reverence, recognition. There was nothing but the cool weight of it in her palm. She laid it gently on the desk and turned back to the envelope. There was a folded note beneath the letter, separate, hidden just under the lip. It wasn't written in Marianne's hand. It was a hospital discharge slip. Patient, Lawson, Emily date, March 7th, 1983. Note, released to self. Infant status, unresolved. The ink was faint but legible. In the bottom margin, there was a nurse's scrawled note. Patient uncooperative. Infant reported missing overnight. Social worker alerted. Investigation pending. Clara stared at the words until they stopped making sense. Then she picked up her phone. An hour later, she sat across from Sister Helen in the convent's small parlor. The room had once been a sitting room, probably, though it now served no real function beyond having chairs and silence. Helen poured tea from a ceramic pot without speaking. The cups were old, floral, fragile, the kind you hold with two hands even when you don't need to. I read the letter, Clara said quietly. Helen gave a small nod. And I have questions. I imagine you would. Who was Emily Lawson? Sister Helen didn't answer immediately. She placed the teapot down, adjusted the napkin in her lap, and exhaled like someone about to walk into cold water. She was a patient at Mornington General, she said. She came to us once, years before Marianne took vows. You knew her. Number I knew of her. Marianne mentioned her once. Clara waited. She said Emily was troubled, that she was alone, and that she wasn't meant to be a mother, but she became one anyway. Clara looked down at her cup. Do you think the baby was me? I don't know what I think, but Marianne was the one who brought you here. That much is true. You mean to the convent? Helen's voice dropped. Number means she brought you into town. She found someone to take you in. Clara sat back, stunned. Wait, are you saying I was adopted? Helen folded her hands. Did your parents ever speak about your early childhood? Barely, Clara admitted. They always said I was a gift, one of those vague phrases that means nothing. It may have meant more than you knew. Clara left the parlor with her pulse drumming in her ears. She returned to her room and paced, the floor creaking beneath her steps. The box sat open on the desk, its contents laid out like evidence at a trial no one was present to attend. The bracelet, the clipping, the photograph, the rosary, the note. If Sister Marianne hadn't taken her in, hadn't delivered her to someone in town, what would have happened? Would she have ended up in foster care? Would she have vanished like so many others? And why now? Why, after all this time, had her aunt, or whatever Marianne really was, decided to break the silence? A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. She opened it to find Helen standing there, coat draped over one arm. "There's someone you might want to meet," she said. Clara blinked. "Who?" "She used to work at the hospital. She may remember Emily. She's in a care home now, but she's lucid most days." Clara nodded slowly. "I'll get my keys," she said. The care home was about 20 minutes down the road, set between a shuttered gas station and a field of long, brittle grass that rustled like paper in the wind. It was called Cedar Pines, though there were no pine trees on the property, just a few struggling birches and the tired-looking remains of a rose garden out front. The paint on the welcome sign had chipped away in layers, the same way time had peeled at the lives of the people inside. Clara stood in the lobby beside Sister Helen, who had insisted on coming with her. The receptionist, a woman in her 60s with large glasses and a nurse's badge, was flipping through a clipboard. "You're here to see Emily Lawson?" she asked, without lifting her eyes. "Yes," Clara said. "Is she able to have visitors?" "She has her days." The woman finally looked up. "She doesn't talk much, but she listens. She likes the window seat in the rec room." She paused, then added, "You look a bit like her." Clara felt something drop in her stomach. "Do I?" The woman nodded. "Mostly the eyes. It's the first thing I noticed." She handed Clara a visitor's badge and waved toward the hallway behind her. "Go on back, second door on the left." The rec room was warm and quiet, save for the low murmur of a television in the corner and the soft click of a jigsaw puzzle being worked on by a man with trembling hands. Emily Lawson sat near the window. She was thin, not sickly, but delicate, like a person made of folded paper. Her hair, mostly gray, was pulled back in a low bun, and her cardigan was buttoned all the way to the collar. Her face had that particular stillness that came from years of no longer being asked questions. Clara approached slowly. "Miss Lawson?" The woman didn't react, so Clara stepped closer and crouched beside her chair. "My name is Clara Reeves," she said softly. "I think you might have known someone I'm connected to. Sister Marianne." At that, the woman turned her head, only slightly, and looked at her. Not recognition exactly, but not indifference either. Clara took a deep breath. "I think I might be the child you lost." Emily blinked. Her eyes were pale blue, clouded by age but sharply focused. One hand moved slightly, just a tremor, and rested on the edge of her armrest. "I don't know if you remember," Clara continued. "There was a storm. You were at Mornington General, March 1983. Still no words, just the steady gaze. "I don't expect you to confirm anything, I thought you should know I'm okay." A long pause. Then, barely audible, Emily said, "She said you'd be safe." Clara's heart stilled. "She?" she asked. Emily didn't answer, but her hand moved again, this time reaching out gently, fingertips brushing Clara's sleeve before settling back onto her lap. It was a touch without certainty, but not without meaning. Clara sat with her for another 10 minutes. They didn't speak again, but when she stood to leave, Emily nodded once, almost imperceptibly, as though to say, "I remember something, and maybe that's enough." Back in the car, Clara sat behind the wheel without starting the engine. Sister Helen watched her, hands folded neatly in her lap. "She remembered," Clara said quietly. "Not many do," Helen replied. "She was in a bad place when it happened, but she wasn't cruel. Just scared." Helen nodded. "And alone." Clara stared out at the field beyond the parking lot. The wind had picked up, and the grass moved like waves. She wondered how many lives had been changed in moments like that, not through violence or betrayal, but through fear, silence, and the unbearable weight of choice. "She said Marianne told her I'd be safe," Clara murmured. Helen said nothing for a long time. Then, Marianne never stopped watching from a distance. She had ways. A social worker here, a teacher there. She checked on you, quietly. Why didn't she ever say anything? She believed she'd done the wrong thing for the right reasons, and that she didn't deserve a second chance. Clara turned the key in the ignition. That sounds like her. That night, back at the convent, Clara walked the garden path behind the chapel. The grounds were overgrown, but still held shape, a narrow stone path weaving through wild rosemary and collapsed flower beds. A wooden bench sat beneath a cedar tree at the edge of the grove. She sat there with the box on her lap, slowly turning its contents over one more time. The hospital bracelet, the photo, the clipping, the rosary, the discharge note. Each item whispered something incomplete, fragments that didn't quite add up to a whole truth, but which hinted at one. She took out her phone and opened the search engine again. Mornington birth records. March 1983. Emily Lawson, daughter adoption Catholic convent, unofficial placements DNA testing services. That last one stuck. She clicked on the link. If the bracelet was real, and it was, then maybe she could confirm at least one thing. DNA wouldn't lie, even if everyone else had. She ordered a kit. Then she sat back and let the dark fall over the convent like a blanket pulled across the past. Clara found Sister Helen in the chapel. The older woman sat in one of the back pews, hands resting in her lap. Her head bowed, but not in prayer. Her posture was too still, too deliberate, more like someone sitting with memory than with God. Clara didn't speak right away. She slid quietly into the pew behind her and waited. The silence between them settled gently, the way dust settles after a storm. When Helen finally spoke, her voice was quiet but certain. "You're not finished asking, are you?" Clara leaned forward. "Number, I don't think I ever will be." Helen turned slightly, her profile caught in the amber light from the stained glass. "I don't have all the answers," she said, "but I have a few. And maybe that's something." They walked the garden path together, the same one Clara had taken alone the night before. Morning mist still clung to the shrubs, and the soil was soft beneath their feet. Sister Helen stopped by a low stone wall near the back of the property. There was a bench here too, older than the one near the cedar tree, its wood bleached gray by sun and rain. "This is where she used to come," Helen said. "Marianne, when she needed to think." Clara sat slowly, fingers tracing the rough edge of the stone wall. "Did she tell you about the baby?" Helen didn't answer immediately. "She told me pieces, years apart, and not all at once. Like someone hiding notes inside a wall and hoping the house wouldn't fall before someone found them." Clara nodded. "That sounds like her. She came to the convent shortly after the baby went missing. She wasn't seeking forgiveness. Not then. She was seeking somewhere to bury the grief." Clara turned toward her. "Was it grief or guilt?" Helen gave a small, sad smile. "Sometimes they're the same thing." The fog was beginning to lift as they walked back toward the chapel. "She wasn't the mother," Clara said suddenly. "She said so in the letter." "No," Helen replied. "But she wanted to be. She loved the child. I think she saw something in that baby that reminded her of herself. A chance to rewrite the story." Clara looked down at her shoes, her voice thin. "Do you know what happened that night, when the baby went missing?" "I know what Marianne told me." "Which was that Emily had panicked, that she'd been threatening to leave the hospital against medical advice. She was unstable, frightened. And when she disappeared, the child disappeared with her." "But she didn't take me." "Number, Marianne said she found you alone. In a linen closet, wrapped in someone's sweater. The nurse who discovered you called it a miracle. Marianne called it a moment of clarity." Clara's throat tightened. "So she took me?" "Yes. And she didn't tell anyone." Later that day, Clara returned to the guest room and sat with the box again. She replayed Sister Helen's words in her mind, over and over. The idea that she had been left behind, hidden, that Marianne had found her not as a thief, but as a savior. It didn't feel clean, it didn't feel righteous, but it felt human. And that was somehow worse. She pulled out her notebook and wrote down the fragments she had. Emily Lawson equals biological mother. Clara left in hospital during breakdown. Sister Marianne found her, didn't report quiet placement with a family in Mornington. No official adoption, possible legal breach. No paper trail. Her name, her life, her very identity. Possibly built on an illegal act carried out by someone who genuinely believed they were doing the right thing. That night, Clara stood by the convent window watching the fog roll in again. She wondered, if someone had told her parents everything, if the truth had come out then, what would they have done? Kept her, returned her, reported Marianne. She didn't know, and she wasn't sure what answer would hurt more. The next morning, the DNA kit arrived by courier. She opened the package carefully, as though it might explode. The instructions were clear. Swab, seal, send. Wait. She took the sample and placed it in the return envelope, staring at the flap before sealing it. Once it was closed, something shifted inside her. Not a sense of peace, but inevitability. The kind that comes after you've jumped and gravity does the rest. The envelope was gone. The test had been sealed, labeled, and dropped in the convent's outgoing post. Clara watched Sister Helen place it in the canvas mailbag without ceremony, as though it were no different than a prayer request or a letter to a supplier. But to Clara, it felt like an anchor. She returned to the guest room and lay on the bed fully clothed, eyes fixed on the ceiling. Her limbs felt heavy, her mind sluggish, like she was walking underwater. There was no immediate relief in action, only a new kind of waiting. 3 to 5 business days, the kit had promised. 5, realistically. 5 days. By day 2, the silence was starting to itch. Clara spent her time pacing the convent grounds, reading half of books she didn't remember starting, and watching the sky shift through the chapel's stained glass windows. The light that came through the colored panes painted the pews in fractured reds and blues, like memory bleeding across time. Sister Helen gave her space, but occasionally left a plate of food by her door. Always covered, always untouched by questions. On the 3rd day, Clara found herself in the convent's small archives room. She hadn't meant to go there. She had wandered past it before without interest. But something pulled her inside this time. The room was lined with wooden cabinets and labeled boxes. Records, sermons, obituaries. A quiet bureaucracy of faith. She wasn't sure what she was looking for until she found it. A folder labeled SM tucked behind a box of baptismal records. She opened it slowly. Inside were 2 documents. The first was a simple form, an intake report. Marianne Reeves, age 26, admitted to the convent in May of 1983. Seeking long-term cloister, personal trauma indicated, vows not yet made. The second document was shorter, handwritten, a note clipped to her intake. Arrived with infant child, child not claimed, declined to explain origins, permission granted for outside placement through informal channels. Entry condition, no further inquiry. Clara stared at it. There it was, not proof, not in a legal sense, but confirmation. The story Sister Helen had gently unfolded, now preserved in the brittle folds of bureaucracy. She sat down on the floor, the file still in her hands. She didn't cry. She didn't feel anything close to relief. Just a growing awareness of how many people had looked away so carefully, so completely. That night, the wind howled through the trees like it had somewhere to be. Clara stood outside the chapel, wrapped in a borrowed coat. The cold bit at her skin, But she didn't move. She thought about Emily Lawson, the woman who had looked at her with no clear recognition but hadn't looked away. About Sister Marianne, who had made a decision out of desperation or hope or both. And about her parents, the ones who raised her, who may never have known the truth or had chosen not to ask. She realized she had no idea which was worse, being taken or being given away. Day 4 arrived with drizzle and silence. Clara was in the kitchen when Sister Helen entered carrying a small envelope. It was white, unmarked, the lab's return. "Your name's on it," Helen said, offering it without drama. Clara took it, fingers stiff. She waited until she was alone in her room to open it. The results were clinical, printed in black ink on sterile paper, impersonal and precise. The wording was what she had expected. Cold, definitive. Subject: Clara Reeves' biological match to Emily Lawson, confirmed, 99.998%. Relationship maternal. No matching DNA found for other potential relatives in current database. Clara read it once, then again. There it was. Emily Lawson was her biological mother. No doubt, no ambiguity. The woman in the care home, quiet, brittle, unfamiliar, had given her life, and Marianne had taken it from her. Or saved it, or both. Clara didn't leave her room that evening. She sat at the desk and stared out at the fog, her thoughts circling like birds with nowhere to land. Was she angry? Yes, but it was a dull, tired anger. The kind that came not from betrayal but from too many people deciding things on her behalf. She felt something break, but quietly. Not like a window shattering, more like a button popping loose on a well-worn coat. She whispered, "What would you have done if you'd been me?" But Marianne wasn't there to answer. Only the quiet rosary on the desk and the broken cross beside it. The next morning, Clara asked Sister Helen one question. Did she ever regret it? Helen didn't ask what it meant. She didn't say, but I think she prayed about it every day. That's not the same as regret. The tapes were hidden in plain sight. A shoebox beneath Sister Marianne's bed, tucked behind a row of paperback theology books and an old pair of sandals. Nothing secret, just forgotten. Clara had returned to the room one last time, unsure of what she was looking for, until her hand brushed the cardboard edge. Inside were 6 cassette tapes, each labeled in the same neat handwriting. 1. March 1987 2. May 1991 3. July 1996 4. December 2001 5. June 2007, 6th August 2013. No, Helen agreed. But it's close. There was no recorder in the room, but Sister Helen provided one from the archives, a dusty black device with peeling foam around the earpiece. I think she meant for someone to find them, Helen said. She didn't lock them away. She left them under memory, not under key. Clara nodded. She waited until night. She chose the 1991 tape first, not the earliest, not the most recent. Just the middle. She pressed play. There was a moment of soft static, then the sound of Sister Marianne's voice. It was strange, familiar but distorted, like a song you knew in childhood played on broken speakers. It's summer, the voice said. The bells rang at 6 this morning. I prayed, but my mind wandered. A pause. There's something about grief. It doesn't age. You do, but it doesn't. Clara sat still, knees pulled up to her chest. Today I dreamed of her again. The child. She was wearing red. We were walking in a field. She asked me if she had ever had a real name. I couldn't answer her, because I never knew what name she should have had. Clara clicked stop. She stared at the tape in her hand. It didn't feel like listening to a confession. Not really. It felt like hearing someone talk to a part of themselves they couldn't look in the eye. She inserted another tape, this one from 2007. I almost wrote to her today. She'd be, what, 24 now? I think about where she might be. College, a job, maybe angry, maybe fine. Sometimes I pray she never thinks about me at all, that her life is too full to look back. A pause. Then softer. But mostly, I hope she's the kind of person who does look back, because that means she was raised with love. And questions. Clara pressed pause again. She let the silence stretch. Was she the kind of person who looked back? She didn't know anymore. She wasn't sure if this journey was courage or just compulsion. She played another segment. Tape 3, July 1996. I went to town last week. There was a girl there. Couldn't have been older than 13. She had your walk. That same distracted way you looked at things, like they were saying something but not out loud. I followed her, not for long, just until I saw her mother. Not me, just someone steady. You were steady once, before I handed you off. God forgive me. I never stopped seeing you in strangers. Clara's throat tightened. She fast-forwarded the tape and hit play again. If someone ever listens to these, if it's you, I don't want your forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I want you to know that you were not a mistake. The mistake was thinking I had the right to fix what wasn't mine. It was nearly 2 a.m. when Clara stopped listening. Her head ached from the headphones. Her chest hurt worse. She lined the tapes up on the desk like gravestones. There was no final recording. Nothing after 2013. 11 years of silence followed. Clara didn't wonder why. She already knew. Some things get quieter as they approach the end. Not out of peace, out of exhaustion. She went to Sister Helen the next morning and asked, "Did you know about the tapes?" "Yes," Helen said. "Why didn't you say anything?" "They weren't mine to give. They were yours to find." Back in her room, Clara wrote for the first time since arriving. Not an article, not a profile, just words. She didn't try to name what she felt. She simply wrote down what she knew. That memory is a form of faith. That silence can be louder than guilt. That being saved and being taken are sometimes the same thing. And that Marianne, the woman she had once known as her quiet, disappearing aunt, had never truly disappeared at all. She'd just been waiting to be heard. The results came on a Tuesday. A plain envelope again, no fanfare, just a second return from the DNA service. Clara sat at the desk with her hand resting on the unbroken seal for several minutes before opening it. She already knew what it said. She could feel it. Still, she read the paper slowly, letting each sentence settle. Subject: Clara Reeves matched to Emily Lawson. Confirmed a relationship, biological mother. No confirmed match to Marianne Reeves, no additional first-degree relatives found in current database. No surprise. But surprises weren't the only things that could shake you. She walked to the chapel after, though not to pray, just to sit. The light slanted through the windows as it always did, beautiful and uncaring. Clara sat in the back pew, letter folded beside her, hands clasped but idle. She kept thinking, now what? There was no courtroom to visit, no family meeting to hold, no big revelation that changed everything. There was only the truth, and it didn't fix anything. That evening, Clara and Sister Helen sat at the old wooden table in the convent kitchen, drinking tea in silence. Eventually, Clara asked, "Why do you think she never told me?" Helen stirred her cup. "I think she believed it would hurt you more than help you. That her sin, if that's what it was, should die with her." Clara nodded slowly. "But she left the box. She did. She made sure I would find it." "She did," Helen repeated. "Even guilt wants to be known before it dies." Clara looked down into her cup. "She wasn't my aunt." "No," Helen agreed. "But she loved you. I don't know if that makes it better or worse." The next day, Clara drove into town for the first time. She had avoided Mornington proper. The grocery store, the library, the people. Until now. But something pulled her in. Not curiosity, not nostalgia, just the weight of a story that had lived its life in the dark. She parked outside the Mornington Public Library, a red brick building that hadn't changed much since the 80s. Inside, a librarian in her 40s looked up and offered a neutral smile. "Can I help you find something?" "I think so," Clara said. "Do you keep local obituaries?" "Back to the 60s, paper and digital. What name?" "Emily Lawson," the librarian typed, then clicked. "We've got some articles. Not an obituary, though. She's still alive, I think. Long-term care." Clara nodded. "I visited her." "You family." "I'm not sure what I am." The librarian paused, unsure how to respond. "I'll print the records for you," she said gently. Clara sat with the pages at a corner table by the window. Emily had lived a quiet, sad life. A few arrests for trespassing, one minor drug charge, a short stay in a psychiatric ward. Nothing violent, nothing malicious. Just a person slowly unraveling in a world that didn't catch her in time. The last entry before the care home admission read, "Subject disoriented." Mentioned the nun several times. Claims child was taken. No official record of custody loss. The word stared back like a bruise she didn't remember getting. Back at the convent, Clara sat by the window in her guest room as night settled over the trees. She no longer saw herself as stolen. She wasn't given away either. She was redirected. A decision made by two broken women. One unable to hold on, the other unable to let go. Who had both believed they were doing what was best for a child they barely knew. And maybe they were. Maybe they weren't. The truth hadn't clarified her life. It had made it more uncertain, but at least it was honest now. And honesty, Clara was learning, was not the same as closure. The receptionist at Cedar Pines recognized her this time. "Back again?" she asked with a faint smile. "Emily's in the same place, window seat as always." Clara nodded and signed in. The clipboard wobbled under her pen. Her hands were steady. Her chest wasn't. It had been a week since the DNA results arrived. She hadn't told anyone. Not Sister Helen, not Emily, not even herself in any complete way. Saying it out loud felt permanent, and nothing about this felt like it belonged to permanence. She walked the familiar hallway, her boots soft against the linoleum. The faint scent of antiseptic mingled with something warmer. Maybe a diffuser, maybe just time. The rec room was quiet. A TV played something low and familiar, a news anchor murmuring into the air like background weather. Emily Lawson sat exactly where she had before. Same cardigan, same hair pinned in a loose bun, a different blanket folded across her knees. Blue this time, stitched in a clumsy zigzag. Clara walked toward her slowly. "Hi," she said, keeping her voice gentle. Emily didn't look up. Clara sat beside her. "I got the results," she said. "You're my mother." Still, no reaction. "I thought maybe knowing would change something," Clara continued. "That I'd understand you, that I'd understand her. But I think I only understand what it feels like to be between two people who didn't get to choose much." That made Emily turn. Not sharply, not dramatically. Just enough. Her eyes were cloudy, but they locked with Clara's. The recognition wasn't full. Not a lightning strike, not a gasp. But it was there. A flicker, a pause, a depth that hadn't been there before. Emily reached out and touched Clara's sleeve, the same way she had the first time. This time Clara took her hand and held it. Neither of them spoke. For 20 minutes they sat together, their hands resting lightly in the space between chairs, the late afternoon sun casting slow-moving shadows across the floor. Before she left, Clara leaned down and said softly, "I'm okay. I just wanted you to know that." Emily blinked. Then, with a voice dry and paper-thin, she said, "She said you'd be strong." It was the only sentence she spoke, but it was enough. Outside, the wind had shifted. Clara sat in her car for a long time, the heater ticking softly as it warmed the cabin. She didn't cry. She didn't call anyone. She just sat there with her thoughts stacked inside her like books she didn't have time to read yet. In her lap was a copy of the DNA results, folded in thirds. She almost tossed it into the glove compartment but decided against it. Instead, she placed it in her bag with the hospital bracelet and photo, not because she needed them anymore, but because they had belonged to someone else for so long. Now they belonged to her. Back at the convent, Sister Helen met her at the door. "Well?" she asked. She remembered something, Clara said. "Maybe not everything, but enough." Helen nodded. She always did carry memory like a cracked glass. Sometimes it held, sometimes it didn't. Clara followed her into the kitchen, where the kettle had already begun to sing. "Have you decided what you'll do next?" Helen asked. "I don't know yet," Clara admitted. "Go back, maybe right, maybe not. You could stay another few days," Helen offered. "No expectations." Clara smiled, a small, tired thing. "That sounds nice." That night, Clara returned to the tapes one last time. She didn't play them. She just held them, one by one, and read the dates aloud like names on a stone. Then she placed them back in the box and closed the lid. Some things had been said. Others hadn't. But the silence that remained between them now felt less like a wall and more like a room. A place she could move around in. A place she could leave or return to as needed. The box had never seemed heavy before. It wasn't large, barely the size of a shoebox. But as Clara lifted it onto the bed that morning, it felt denser than it had any right to be. Like the weight had less to do with the objects inside and more with what they meant now. She had packed up most of her things. Her clothes were folded into a soft-sided bag. Her notebook was zipped shut. Her rental car sat waiting outside, hidden behind a veil of coastal fog. But the box still sat on the bed, unopened since the night she'd stopped listening to the tapes. She ran her hand along the lid. The grain of the wood was smooth, almost warm. She hadn't intended to open it again, but something tugged. Clara turned it over. That's when she noticed the lining. The bottom panel wasn't flush. A small seam ran along one edge. Subtle, almost invisible unless you were searching for it. She pressed gently. The panel shifted beneath her fingers, then gave way with a soft click. Inside, tucked flat beneath the wood, was a sealed envelope. Her name was written on the front, but this time, it wasn't Clara. It was, "To the child I gave away." She sat down slowly. The letter felt warm in her hands, not from heat, from presence, as if it had waited patiently all these years for exactly this moment. She unfolded it with care. Marianne's handwriting was the same, steady, controlled. Only this time, it seemed more vulnerable, less rehearsed. "To the child I gave away. I've been writing this letter in my mind since the day I left you in that quiet, careful house with people I prayed were good. Some days I think you were better off never knowing. Other days, I think you always knew. I want to tell you something I've never said aloud, even to myself. I didn't find you by accident. I was there that night, the night you were born. I knew your mother. Not well, but enough to know she wasn't ready. Enough to know that the world wouldn't be kind to a child born into her life. When she panicked, when she left you, I waited before speaking. I watched. And then I took you. I didn't call the police. I didn't alert the nurses. I told myself it was compassion, but it wasn't. Not entirely. It was fear and guilt and something harder to name. I loved you the moment I saw you. That's the truth I never said. You were not mine, but I wanted you to be. And when I gave you away again, placed you into someone else's hands, it broke something in me that never healed. People will say what I did was wrong. They may be right, but you were never a mistake. You were the only thing in my life that ever felt entirely real. If you're reading this, it means I failed to say these words aloud. But maybe this is better. I don't want forgiveness. I only want you to know that you were seen, and that being given away was never the same as being unwanted. Emma. Clara sat with the letter in her lap for a long time. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. Her eyes rested on the final line, tracing it like a scar. Being given away was never the same as being unwanted. It was not peace she felt, not exactly. It was gravity, like something inside her had finally settled after years of floating just above the surface of her own life. She walked out to the chapel with the letter folded in her coat pocket. Sister Helen was lighting candles near the altar. Clara took a seat in the third pew and waited until the silence grew familiar. Then she said, quietly, "She left me another letter." Helen turned, surprise softening her expression. Did she? It was hidden, beneath the box lining. Helen walked over and sat beside her. She said she loved me. She did. She said she didn't want forgiveness. Helen was quiet for a moment, then said, "Even saints don't get to choose how they're remembered." That afternoon, Clara packed the last of her things and loaded the car. The box went into the back seat, still closed, but lighter now. Before she left, she walked the garden path one last time, the one Marianne had walked, the one she had sat beside, hiding parts of herself in silence. At the old cedar bench, Clara paused. She looked out at the trees, the moss on the stones, the light breaking gently through the overcast sky. Then she said, not to anyone, not even to Marianne, but to the air that had held all of it for so long, "I see you." Clara left early. The fog was still tucked along the treetops as she pulled out of the convent drive, the gravel crunching beneath her tires. The air smelled like rain and cedar, clean in the way that made you believe something somewhere had been forgiven. She didn't say goodbye to the sisters. Sister Helen had risen early and left a thermos of coffee on the front step, along with a folded piece of paper. Clara read it while the engine warmed. "Clara, you don't owe us a farewell, but you leave behind something heavier than silence, truth, and that's a holy thing, even when it hurts. Travel gently. H." She placed the note in the glove box next to the rosary and the hospital bracelet. The road out of Mornington was familiar now. The leaning trees, the curves that disappeared behind low brush and reappeared as if revealing secrets reluctantly. But this time, she didn't rush. She stopped once, at a scenic overlook where the sea reached out endlessly beneath the cliffs. The wind here was stronger, sharper. She stood at the edge and imagined Marianne standing here once, coat wrapped tight, face tilted into the wind, thinking thoughts she never wrote down. Clara pulled the final letter from her coat pocket and read it again, her eyes following the ink like a tide chart. She folded it carefully, then, on instinct, slipped it between the pages of her notebook, not to bury it, to carry it. Back home, the world hadn't changed. The streets were still too loud. Her inbox was still full of unread pitches. A voicemail blinked on her phone from Andrew, asking if she was still off the grid, and whether she wanted to write a story about wildfire recovery in California. She didn't return the call. Not yet. Instead, she unpacked slowly, placed the box on a shelf, left the tapes in their bundle, unfolded her clothes with care, as if they too needed to be treated like artifacts of a former life. She didn't listen to the tapes again. She didn't have to. That weekend, she took her notebook to the park and sat beneath a sycamore tree. The sun filtered through the leaves in uneven patterns, and children played nearby, their voices like distant bells. She opened the notebook and wrote, "Grace isn't clean. It isn't a single gesture, a ribbon-tied resolution. It's messy, Heavy, sometimes selfish, sometimes undeserved. Sometimes the closest we ever get to love is the moment we realize how much of it was broken and given anyway. She paused, then added, "She took me, but she also carried me. I don't know how to reconcile that. Maybe I never will. But I know this. I wasn't abandoned. I was altered." That night, Clara lit a candle on her kitchen counter. It wasn't for anyone in particular. It wasn't even a ritual. She just wanted to mark the day, to acknowledge that something had passed from shadow into shape. A week later, she mailed a letter of her own. It was addressed to the convent, handwritten, plain. "Sister Helen, I won't publish anything. This wasn't a story for anyone else. But I want you to know, the silence you kept wasn't wasted. It made room for something else. I'll keep the tapes, I'll keep the letter. I don't forgive her, not fully. But I see her now, and I think that's the beginning of something. With gratitude, Clara." She sealed it, and for the first time since the first letter arrived, she felt something loosen in her chest. Not gone, not fixed, just moved. There was no turning point, no moment where everything clicked or healed or made sense. Instead, Clara's life resumed slowly, like a body waking after a long illness. She answered emails, she did laundry, she made dinner from actual ingredients. And some nights she dreamed, not of Marianne or Emily or the convent, but of ordinary things. A crowded train, a quiet bookstore, rain on the roof. She didn't tell many people what happened. There was no language for it that didn't sound dramatic or vague, and she didn't want sympathy. She wanted time, so she gave herself that. One Saturday morning, weeks after she returned, Clara visited a used bookstore on the far side of the city, a place she hadn't gone in years. The aisles were narrow, the floorboards uneven. It smelled like old paper and forgotten summers. She wandered without aim, letting her fingers trail over titles. In the back corner she found it, a worn copy of The Secret Garden, the same edition her aunt had once tucked into that first note. She bought it without thinking. When she got home, she placed it on her desk beside the rosary and the photograph of the woman holding the baby. Not a shrine, just placement. Clara eventually returned to writing. Not for a magazine, not for an audience, for herself. She started a new notebook. First line, "Some truths are too heavy to hold all at once, but carried slowly, they make a person more honest." She didn't write a memoir. She didn't publish anything. She simply wrote. Autumn came early that year. The leaves outside her apartment turned amber and red, then scattered like small paper confessions along the sidewalk. Clara walked more. She cooked with the windows open. She smiled more easily, not because things were better, but because they were known. One afternoon, she mailed a package to the convent. Inside, the tapes. She kept the final letter, the one hidden in the box, but returned the rest, along with a short note. "For the archive or the fire, whatever feels right. Thank you for holding this until I was ready." See. Months passed. The grief didn't leave, but it softened, changed shape. What once felt like a raw edge became a seam, stitched but visible. She could run her finger along it without flinching. She still didn't know whether what Marianne had done was wrong or right, only that it was real, that it had shaped her, and that, somehow, it had also saved her. The following spring, Clara took a train north. She didn't go to the convent. She went to the ocean. There was a stretch of coast near Mornington she'd found once on a map, close to the overlook where she'd read the last letter. She walked the cliff edge slowly, wind in her hair, the sky wide and pale above her. She brought no flowers, no ashes, just herself. At the highest point, she sat down on a patch of flattened grass, opened her notebook and wrote, "She tried to hold me. She let me go. She left me a box full of things she couldn't say aloud, and I heard her anyway. That, in the end, is grace. Not the absence of harm, but the willingness to carry it without bitterness. Clara stayed until the wind turned cold and her fingers stiffened around the pen. Then she closed the notebook, stood, and let the last light of the day wash over her face. She didn't say goodbye. She simply turned and walked back down the path, the sound of the sea behind her and her own footsteps ahead.